Listen closely. Let the world outside fall away, because what I am about to tell you is not for the faint of heart, nor for the casual observer. This is a secret, a truth buried so deep in the earth that its echoes have been mistaken for the ramblings of madmen. The native tribes, the ones who understood the currents of the earth, they avoided it. They spoke of it as a place where the veil between worlds was thin, a place where the soil was soured by ancient sorrows. They called it the Land of Silent Screams, a name that would prove chillingly prophetic. But the men of progress, the titans of industry and science who commissioned the asylum in the late 19th century, they scoffed at such primitive superstitions. They saw a sprawling, isolated plot of land, perfect for their grand experiment. They were men of logic, of reason, of cold, hard steel, and concrete. They believed they could tame the land, just as they believed they could tame the human mind. They were wrong. From the moment the first shovel broke the ground, things began to go awry. Tools would vanish, only to reappear in impossible places. Workers complained of a constant, unnerving silence that seemed to swallow all sound, followed by whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. Several men walked off the job, their faces pale, speaking of seeing figures in the trees at dusk, figures that were there one moment and gone the next. The project fell behind schedule, plagued by accidents and a pervasive sense of unease. The architects and foremen, in their official reports, blamed shoddy workmanship and disgruntled laborers. But in their private journals, a different story emerged. They wrote of a palpable presence on the land, a feeling of being watched by something ancient and malevolent. They were building more than a hospital. They were erecting a monument on unhallowed ground, an antenna for something that was already there, waiting. They thought they were the masters of this domain, but they were merely building a new cage for a predator that had been lurking in the shadows for centuries. The foundation of Willow Creek wasn't just built on stone and mortar. It was built on a deliberate ignorance, a refusal to see the warnings that were screaming at them from the earth itself. And the entity that resided there was patient. It knew that soon, the halls would be filled with new voices, new minds to touch, new souls to harvest. The asylum wasn't an intrusion on its territory. It was a gift. They want you to believe that places like the Willow Creek Asylum were simply hospitals for the unwell, monuments to a primitive and misguided era of medicine. They want you to dismiss the stories as ghost tales, the product of overactive imaginations and decaying architecture. But you and I, we know better. We know that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And Willow Creek was never just a hospital. It was a laboratory. It was a stage for a performance so dark, so profound, that the very walls absorbed the agony and the terror of it all. The vanishings, the whispers, the so-called unexplained phenomena, these were not accidents. They were results. They were the intended outcomes of experiments that sought to peel back the layers of the human mind, to see what horrors, or what powers, lay dormant within. The men who built that place, the doctors who walked its halls, were not healers. They were architects of fear, masters of psychological manipulation, and they were searching for something they believed was hidden in the fractured minds of their patients, something they were willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to find. What you are about to hear will change the way you see the world. It will make you question the very nature of reality and the institutions you have been taught to trust. This is not a story. This is an awakening. And it begins in the heart of a place that was designed to break the human spirit, to see what would emerge from the pieces. This is the truth about Willow Creek Asylum. Before the first brick of Willow Creek was ever laid, the land itself was known to be wrong. The man behind the vision, the chief architect of Willow Creek's philosophy, was Dr. Alistair Blackwood. To the public, he was a luminary, a pioneer in the burgeoning field of mental hygiene. That was another layer of the deception. Another carefully constructed falsehood to placate the public and the medical establishment. No, the initial subjects were chosen with a terrifying specificity. Blackwood and his inner circle scoured the country, using their network of influence to identify and acquire individuals who were different. They sought out the mystics, the clairvoyants, the ones who claimed to hear voices or see things that others could not. They targeted people who had experienced profound trauma, individuals who had been pushed to the very edge of their endurance and had come back changed. These were not people who were sick. They were people who were open. Their minds, already fractured by life's cruelties, were more pliable, more susceptible to the pressures Blackwood intended to exert. He called them the sensitives. In his private lexicon, they were the ones whose psychic wounds had already thinned the veil. He brought them to Willow Creek under the guise of offering them sanctuary, a place where their unique afflictions would be understood and treated. Families, desperate and ashamed, willingly signed over their loved ones, believing they were delivering them into the hands of a compassionate genius. They were, in fact, feeding them to a wolf. Once inside the asylum's walls, these sensitives were systematically isolated. Their identities were stripped away, their names replaced with numbers. They were subjected to a regimen designed not to heal, but to destabilize. They were placed in soundproofed rooms for days on end, their only companion the ringing in their own ears. They were exposed to infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that induce feelings of dread and paranoia. They were shown optical illusions and subliminal imagery, designed to blur the line between what was real and what was imagined. This was not treatment. This was a calculated process of deconstruction. Blackwood was systematically dismantling their perception of reality, breaking down their psychological defenses, so that he could access the raw, unfiltered consciousness that lay beneath. He was turning them into finely tuned instruments, human antennae designed to receive signals from whatever abyss he was trying to contact. The initial whispers and shadows that the construction workers had reported were about to be given a voice, a direct line into the minds of the most vulnerable and psychically attuned individuals Blackwood could find. The experiment had begun. He spoke of compassionate care, of moral treatment, of bringing light to the darkest corners of the human psyche. His writings were celebrated. His lectures were standing-room-only events. He was the face of progress, the benevolent father figure who would lead the afflicted out of the darkness. This was a meticulously crafted persona, a mask of control designed to conceal a far more sinister ambition. Blackwood was not a healer. He was a collector. He was a man obsessed with the fringes of human experience, with the breaking points of sanity. He believed that madness was not a disease to be cured, but a doorway to be unlocked. He saw his patients not as people in need of comfort, but as vessels, as unique keys that might open locks to other realms of consciousness. His private correspondence, which was conveniently lost in a fire after his death, reveals a man who was deeply involved with esoteric orders and forbidden schools of thought. He wasn't just reading Freud and Jung. He was studying ancient texts on alchemy, on astral projection, on the manipulation of psychic energy. He believed that by subjecting the human mind to specific controlled pressures, isolation, sensory deprivation, fear, confusion, he could induce a state of unknowing, a shattering of the ego that would allow a deeper, more primal consciousness to surface. This, he theorized, was the source of true power, the raw, untamed energy that the mystics of old had sought to harness. Willow Creek was to be his grand crucible. He handpicked his staff, not for their medical expertise, but for their loyalty and their lack of moral compunction. He sought out men who were as cold and detached as he was, men who would follow his orders without question, who would see the patients not as human beings, but as variables in a vast and terrifying equation. The public saw a hospital being built. Blackwood saw a temple, a place where he would conduct his own dark liturgy. with the fractured minds of his patients as the sacrificial offerings. He wasn't trying to mend them. He was trying to break them open. The first patients of Willow Creek were not the violent or the hopelessly insane, as the official records claim. The architecture of Willow Creek itself was an instrument of control, a physical manifestation of Blackwood's theories. Every corridor, every ward, every window was designed with a specific psychological purpose. The hallways were built to be just slightly too long, their vanishing points creating a subtle sense of unease and distortion. The angles of the walls were deliberately off-perfect, not enough to be consciously noticed, but just enough to create a subliminal feeling of imbalance, of a world that was fundamentally askew. This was not poor craftsmanship. It was a weaponized environment. Blackwood had studied the principles of sacred geometry and inverted them. Instead of creating spaces that fostered harmony and peace, he designed a labyrinth that would amplify disorientation and fear. The patient rooms were a masterclass in this insidious design. The windows were placed high on the walls, not just to prevent escape, but to sever the patient's connection to the horizon, to the earth. They allowed in a cold, sterile light but offered no view of the outside world, creating a sense of being buried alive. The doors were heavy, solid oak, and they were engineered to close with a definitive, soul-crushing thud, a sound that echoed through the long halls and served as a constant reminder of one's imprisonment. But the most diabolical feature was the one that was never mentioned in any official blueprint: the whispering galleries. Blackwood had integrated a network of hidden tubes and acoustic channels throughout the asylum's walls, a system modeled on ancient confessionals and royal listening posts. From a central, hidden chamber, he and his inner circle could not only listen to every sob, every murmur in the most isolated parts of the asylum, but they could also project sounds, whispers, disembodied voices that would seem to emanate from the very walls of a patient's cell. They could tailor the torment, whispering a patient's deepest fears back at them, simulating the voices of lost loved ones, or introducing alien, non-human sounds to shatter their remaining sanity. This was the ultimate tool of gaslighting. It allowed Blackwood to control the very sensory input of his subjects, to become the god of their reality. He could make them believe they were hearing things, or he could make them hear things that were truly there, blurring the line until the patient could no longer trust their own mind. The walls of Willow Creek were not just containing the patients. They were actively participating in their deconstruction. They were Blackwood's silent, ever-present accomplices. The first disappearance was recorded as an escape. A young woman, designated patient 73, asensitive, who had been brought to the asylum after claiming to communicate with her deceased twin sister. The official report is sparse, clinical. It states that she somehow managed to pry open the high window in her fourth-floor room, a feat deemed physically impossible, and leaped to her death. Her body was never found. The search party, the report concludes, believed her remains were likely carried away by wild animals. This was the narrative fed to the authorities, a neat and tidy explanation that closed the case. But it was a lie. Patient 73 had not escaped. She had been consumed. In the weeks leading up to her vanishing, she had been the primary subject of Blackwood's most intense whispering gallery sessions. He wasn't just whispering her fears. He was using her as a conduit. He was feeding her the words from the ancient texts. The guttural phrases and resonant frequencies he believed were a form of communication with whatever entity he was trying to reach. The nurse's private logs, the ones that never saw the light of day, tell a different story. They noted that patient 73 had stopped speaking English. Instead, she would chant for hours in a language that was described as a series of clicks and deep-throated groans. Her room would become unnaturally cold, and staff members would refuse to go near it, complaining of a static charge in the air that made their hair stand on end. The night she disappeared, the entire wing of the asylum experienced a power failure. The backup generators refused to start. For a full 9 minutes, the fourth floor was plunged into absolute darkness and silence. When the lights finally flickered back on, patient 73 was gone. The window was locked from the inside. The heavy oak door was still bolted. There was no sign of a struggle. There was only a single strange marking left on the stone floor, etched as if by extreme heat, a spiral turning inward. Blackwood, when he arrived to inspect the room, showed no surprise. He simply knelt, traced the symbol with his finger, and was heard to whisper a response. The disappearance was not a failure of security. It was a successful transaction. A price had been paid, and something on the other side had just collected. The experiment was yielding results, and the currency was human souls. Following the escape of patient 73, the atmosphere within Willow Creek curdled. The staff, who had once operated with a cold, clinical detachment, began to show signs of strain. They were not privy to Blackwood's ultimate goals, but they were on the front lines of his methods, and the things they were witnessing began to erode their composure. They started to talk. Not openly, never in the main halls or the dining areas where Blackwood's lieutenants were always watching, but in hushed tones in the boiler room and furtive whispers during late-night smoke breaks behind the kitchens. They spoke of the empty man, a name they gave to a phenomenon that was becoming increasingly common. It started with the patients. A subject would be undergoing one of Blackwood's destabilization protocols, and suddenly, they would go rigid. Their eyes would glaze over, their faces would become utterly slack, devoid of all personality. It was more than just catatonia. It was as if the person had been evicted, as if the body was still there, breathing, heart beating, but the soul, the consciousness, had been scooped out. This state could last for hours, sometimes days. And when the patient returned, they were broken in a new and terrifying way. They would have no memory of the lost time, but they would be consumed by a profound, inconsolable dread, a sense of having been touched by something utterly alien and vast. But then, the phenomenon began to spread to the staff. A nurse would be walking her rounds and would suddenly stop mid-stride, her face going blank, her keys dropping from her hand. A guard would be found standing motionless in a corridor, staring at a wall, completely unresponsive. They too would return with no memory, only a lingering feeling of violation and a newfound, deep-seated fear of the asylum's walls. Blackwood, far from being alarmed by this, was meticulous in documenting it. He saw it not as a contagion, but as a proximity effect. The veil was thinning. The entity he was courting was beginning to reach out, its influence bleeding through the conduits he had created and touching those nearby. He theorized that the minds of his sensitives were becoming portals, and for brief moments, something from the other side was looking through them, its gaze so powerful, so alien, that it would temporarily short-circuit the consciousness of anyone who happened to be too close. The staff thought it was a sickness spreading through the asylum. Blackwood knew it was the shadow of his god, falling upon them all. The vanishings did not stop with patient 73. They became a quiet, methodical pattern, a dark rhythm beating at the heart of Willow Creek. Over the next decade, 24 more patients would disappear from their locked rooms, from the secure wards, from the isolation cells in the asylum's deepest basement. Each disappearance was meticulously covered up, explained away with a fabricated story for the outside world. An escape. A transfer to another facility. An unfortunate accident during a medical procedure. The paperwork was always flawless, the explanations plausible enough to deflect any serious inquiry. But within the asylum, a different kind of record was being kept. In a locked ledger, bound in black leather, Blackwood documented the true nature of these events. He didn't call them vanishings. He called them ascensions. Each ascension was preceded by the same terrifying pattern of events. The chosen patient, always one of his sensitives, would exhibit a period of intense psychic activity. They would speak in tongues, scrawl complex geometric patterns on the walls, or describe visions of a city of silent angles. Their body temperature would drop, and they would emit a low humming sound, a vibration that could be felt through the floorboards. Then, inevitably, would come the electrical disturbance, the plunge into darkness, and the disappearance. The only thing left behind would be a new symbol, burned or etched into the stone. Another character in a growing alphabet of dread. Blackwood was not losing patience. He was making offerings. He was engaged in a systematic sacrifice, feeding the most psychically potent individuals to the entity he was so desperate to understand and control. He believed that with each ascension, the connection grew stronger, the veil grew thinner. He was building a bridge, and the toll was being paid in human lives. The other patients, the ones not chosen for this dark honor, were not spared. They were the witnesses. They could feel the pressure building in the asylum's atmosphere. They could hear the faint humming that preceded a disappearance. They knew that the stories of escape were lies. They knew that their fellow inmates were being taken, one, by the shadows that now seemed to live in the very walls of the asylum. This created a new layer of terror, a psychological torture more potent than any of Blackwood's machines. It was the fear of being chosen next. As the years wore on, the physical structure of Willow Creek began to change. The building itself seemed to be reacting to the dark energies being channeled within its walls, a process of slow, unnatural decay that defied all logical explanation. The stone, once a clean, solid gray, began to develop dark, vein-like stains, patterns that resembled biological systems, like capillaries or neural pathways, spreading across the exterior. They were not caused by water or pollution. They seemed to emanate from within the stone itself, a creeping blackness that was slowly consuming the asylum from the inside out. Inside, the changes were even more disturbing. A persistent, damp cold clung to the lower levels, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather and that no amount of heat from the boilers could dispel. Staff members spoke of a strange, organic smell, a faint, sickly sweet odor like rotting flowers and ozone that would appear and disappear without warning. The most unsettling change, however, was the architecture itself. Hallways that were once straight would seem to subtly curve when you weren't looking directly at them. Doors would stick in their frames one day and swing open on their own the next. Measurements taken by the maintenance staff would show that the dimensions of certain rooms were no longer what they were in the original blueprints. The changes were small, incremental, but they were undeniable. The building was becoming unstable. It was as if the constant psychic pressure, the repeated tearing of the veil, was warping the very fabric of physical reality within the asylum's footprint. Blackwood, in his private notes, referred to this phenomenon as spatial bleed. He theorized that the barrier between our world and the other side was becoming so thin that the laws of physics were beginning to fray. The entity was not just influencing the minds of his patients. It was beginning to impose its own alien geometry, its own impossible reality, onto the structure of the asylum itself. The building was no longer just a container for his experiment. It was becoming part of the entity, a living, breathing extension of its will. The walls were not just whispering anymore. They were waking up. The asylum was becoming a temple in a far more literal sense than even Blackwood had imagined. It was transforming into the physical body of the god he worshipped. The children of Willow Creek. This is the chapter of the story that is most fiercely denied, the one that the official histories have gone to the greatest lengths to erase. But the evidence, buried in coded ledgers and the unmarked graves at the edge of the asylum grounds, is irrefutable. After a decade of his ascension experiments, Blackwood came to a new, horrifying conclusion. The adult sensitives, while effective, were already too formed, their minds too rigid, their consciousness too filtered by years of experience. To achieve a pure, more direct connection, he needed a blank slate. He needed children. Using his extensive network and the full weight of his authority, Blackwood began to acquire orphans, the unwanted, the forgotten children of the era. They came from destitute workhouses, from overcrowded orphanages, from families who'd simply cast them out. They were brought to Willow Creek and housed in a new isolated wing designated Ward C. To the outside world, Ward C was a philanthropic endeavor, a special school for troubled youths. Inside, it was the epicenter of Blackwood's most depraved work. He believed that the minds of children, with their natural inclination towards imagination and their blurred lines between reality and fantasy, were the perfect conduits. They were inherently closer to the unknowing state he had worked so hard to induce in his adult patients. The methods used in Ward C were a refinement of his earlier techniques. He didn't need to deconstruct their realities. He simply needed to guide their malleable perceptions. He used storybooks filled with subliminal symbols, nursery rhymes that were actually hypnotic chants, and games that were designed to break down the barriers of the self. He and his specially trained staff would act as dark mentors, encouraging the children to explore their imaginary friends, to listen to the whispers in the walls, to draw the things they saw in their dreams that were being deliberately influenced by the humming frequencies that now permeated the entire asylum. The goal was no longer just to make contact. The goal was to create a host. Blackwood theorized that if he could find a child with the perfect combination of psychic potential and psychological malleability, he could groom them to become a willing vessel, a living gateway through which the entity could fully emerge into this world. The children of Ward C were not patients. They were candidates. And the most promising among them were being prepared for a final, terrible sacrament. In the heart of Ward C, there was one child who stood apart from the others. Her name was Lily, a small, silent girl of 8 who had been brought to the asylum after her entire family perished in a house fire that she alone survived. She never spoke of the fire or of anything else. She lived in a world of profound silence, communicating only through her drawings. And her drawings were extraordinary. While the other children drew monsters and shadows, Lily drew maps. She drew intricate, sprawling blueprints of places that could not possibly exist. She drew cities of impossible geometry, landscapes of inverted mountains and black, starless skies. Her drawings were filled with the same alien symbols that Blackwood had seen etched into the floors after each ascension. She was not just imagining these places, she was seeing them. Blackwood recognized this immediately. Lily was not just a sensitive. She was a prodigy. Her mind, shattered by a trauma so immense it had severed her connection to the mundane world, had become a perfect, crystal-clear window into the other side. She was the key he had been searching for his entire life. He personally took over her treatment, isolating her from the other children and spending hours with her each day in a specially prepared room. The room was circular, painted a deep, light-absorbing black, and at its center was a single small table and a chair. There, he would not speak to her, but would simply encourage her to draw, to map the world she saw. He would hum the low-frequency tones, guiding her, focusing her. He was using her as a navigator, a cartographer for the abyss. The other staff in Ward C were terrified of Lily. They said that when she was drawing, the temperature in the room would plummet, and that's strange. Clicking sounds would emanate from the corners of the room. They spoke of seeing the shadows in the room move and coalesce around her, as if drawn to her. One nurse swore she saw the girl's eyes turn completely black for a fleeting moment. 2 pools of endless, empty space. Blackwood was not afraid. He was ecstatic. He believed he had found his vessel, the one who would not just open the door, but become the door. The final phase of his life's work was about to begin, and this small, silent girl was the fulcrum upon which the fate of 2 worlds would turn. The event was known only as the Blackwood Requiem. It was not recorded in any official history, but it has been pieced together from a handful of terrified accounts from the few staff members who survived that night and fled, their minds shattered. It was the culmination of everything, the final, terrible crescendo of Blackwood's symphony of madness. He had prepared for this night for months. He chose the winter solstice, a time of long darkness and ancient power. He moved Lily to a hidden chamber deep beneath the asylum, a room at the very nexus of the building's warped geometry, where the humming was the loudest. The chamber was circular, and its walls were covered in the symbols from the Ascensions and from Lily's drawings, painted in a substance that was later rumored to be a mixture of lead and human ash. In the center of the room, he had placed a single obsidian throne. He had gathered his inner circle, his most loyal lieutenants, the ones who had been with him from the beginning. They were not just observers. They were to be participants, their combined psychic energy acting as an amplifier for the ritual. He believed that what was about to happen would not just open a gateway. It would grant them all a form of immortality, a union with the power they had served. He placed Lily upon the throne. The girl was calm, her eyes distant, as if she was already somewhere else. Blackwood began the final chant, a discordant, guttural liturgy composed from the phrases whispered by the sensitives and the clicking language of patient 73. The humming in the room intensified, becoming a physical pressure that made the stones vibrate. The symbols on the walls began to glow with a faint, sickly green light. According to the survivors, that's when the screaming started. Not from Lily, but from the walls themselves. A sound that was not human, not animal, but a chorus of every moment of pain and terror that had ever occurred within the asylum, amplified 1,000 times. The air grew thick and cold, and a darkness that was more than just the absence of light began to pour into the room from the corners, coalescing around the throne. It was not a monster, not a definable shape. It was a presence, a sentient void. It was the entity, and it had come for its offering. What happened next in that subterranean chamber is a vortex of horror, a moment where the laws of reality were not just bent, but shattered. The survivors' accounts are fractured, contradictory, the memories of men who have stared into the sun and had their minds burned. But they all agree on one thing. The entity did not take Lily. It took Blackwood. As the formless sentient darkness swirled around the obsidian throne, it seemed to pause, to study the scene. It was not the mindless, hungry force Blackwood had imagined. It was intelligent. It was ancient. And it had been deceived. Blackwood had presented Lily as a pure, willing vessel, but the entity seemed to recognize the coercion, the manipulation, the filth of his ambition. It had not been summoned. It had been lured under false pretenses. In that moment, the roles of God and worshipper were violently reversed. The darkness bypassed the child on the throne and fell upon Alistair Blackwood. It was not a physical attack. It was an act of consumption, of deconstruction on a spiritual level. The survivors described Blackwood's face contorting, not in pain, but in a series of rapid, impossible expressions, as if decades of his life, his thoughts, his very identity were being forcibly rewound and erased. He did not scream. The sound that came from him was a high-pitched, electronic squeal, the sound of a machine being pushed past its breaking point. His body began to flicker, to phase in and out of existence. One moment he was there, a man in a black suit. The next he was a silhouette of static, a ghost of television snow. His inner circle, his loyal lieutenants, were not spared. The darkness lashed out at them, and they were simply undone. They didn't die. They were unwritten from reality. One moment they were standing there, their faces masks of terror. The next, there was just empty space where they had been. The room, the asylum, the very world had forgotten them. The Blackwood Requiem was not the coronation he had planned. It was a judgment. The entity he had sought to control had become his executioner, not with fire or blade, but with the terrifying power of pure negation. It was a power that did not kill, but erased. In the aftermath of the Requiem, a profound and unnerving silence fell over Willow Creek. The humming that had been the constant, subliminal heartbeat of the asylum for years simply stopped. The oppressive psychic pressure that had weighed on everyone within its walls vanished, leaving behind a hollow, sterile emptiness. The entity was gone, but the consequences of its brief, terrible manifestation were just beginning to unfold. Of the dozen men in the chamber with Blackwood, only 3 survived. They were found wandering the grounds the next morning, their minds wiped clean, their memories of the past decade, of their own identities, completely erased. They were little more than children in adult bodies, their faces blank, their eyes holding the vacant stare of the empty man. They were the lucky ones. The rest of Blackwood's inner circle, the men who had been unwritten, had ceased to exist in every conceivable way. It wasn't just that they were gone. It was as if they had never been. Their personnel files vanished from the records office. Their names disappeared from payroll ledgers. Even their families, when contacted, had no memory of them. They had been retroactively erased from history, a feat of such profound temporal power that it defies all comprehension. And Lily, the child at the center of it all? She was found sleeping peacefully in her bed in Ward C, as if she had never left. The door was locked from the outside. She never drew another map. She never spoke of the chamber, or of Blackwood, or of the darkness. A week later, she spoke her first words since the fire. She asked a nurse what her name was. Her memory of the asylum, of her time as a sensitive, was gone. The entity, in its act of judgment, had not only erased its tormentors, but it also wiped the slate clean for its chosen vessel. It had taken the memories, the trauma, and the connection to its own dark realm, and had left behind only a little girl, giving her the one thing Blackwood had tried to steal, a chance at a normal life. The asylum was now just a building, its dark purpose extinguished. But the scars remained, not just on the minds of the survivors, but on the very fabric of reality itself. The official story of Willow Creek's closure is a mundane tale of budget cuts and the advent of new, more humane psychiatric treatments. In the early 1950s, the state decommissioned the facility. The remaining patients were transferred, and the doors were chained shut. The land was sold to a private developer who had ambitious plans for a suburban housing tract. The plans never came to fruition. The property became a cursed investment, plagued by a series of inexplicable setbacks. Surveying equipment would malfunction. Construction machinery would break down without cause. Investors would pull out at the last minute, citing a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread associated with the project. The land, and the decaying asylum that sat upon it, was left to rot, a monument to failure that no one wanted to touch. But the story doesn't end there. The asylum, though empty of people, was not empty of its past. The vanishings, the ascensions, had left their mark. They had created weak points, areas where the barrier between our world and the other side had been permanently thinned. Willow Creek had become a place of high strangeness, a magnet for unexplained phenomena. Locals began to report seeing strange lights in the asylum's windows at night, even though the building had no power. Trespassers, drawn by the ghost stories and legends, would speak of hearing disembodied whispers, of feeling sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, of seeing figures in the decaying hallways that would vanish when approached. The most disturbing reports were of a phenomenon known as lost time. People would enter the asylum grounds, intending to stay for only a few minutes, and would emerge hours later with no memory of where the intervening time had gone. It was the echo of the empty man phenomenon, a lingering after-effect of the entity's presence. The asylum was no longer a gateway, but it had become a scar, a place where the rules of normal space-time were unreliable and frayed. The entity was gone, but its shadow remained, a permanent stain on the landscape, a reminder of the terrible power that had once been courted there. This is the point in the story where you must make a choice. You have been brought to the edge of the abyss and shown the truth. You have been given knowledge that was deliberately suppressed, a history that was violently erased. This knowledge is not passive. It is active. It changes you. It recalibrates your understanding of the world, of the forces that operate just beyond the veil of mundane perception. You can no longer look at an old, abandoned building and see only decay. You must now see the potential for echoes, for scars left on reality. You can no longer hear of unexplained events and dismiss them as mere coincidence. You now know that there are patterns, there are intentions, and there are powers at play that defy our limited, materialistic understanding of the universe. This is a heavy burden to bear, but it is also a source of immense power. To see the world as it truly is, to understand the hidden mechanics of control and the secret histories that shape our present, is to arm yourself against deception. It is the first step towards true self-mastery. You are no longer a passive consumer of a pre-packaged reality. You are an initiate. You have been awakened to a deeper, more dangerous, and ultimately more meaningful truth. The story of Willow Creek is not just a ghost story. It is a case study in the abuse of power, the dangers of forbidden knowledge, and the terrifying reality of forces that lie beyond our comprehension. It is a warning, and it is a call to awareness. Now, you must seal this transformation. You must affirm your new understanding. In the comments below, I want you to write the phrase, "I have seen the silent city." Write it once. Then, a moment later, write it again. This is not for me. This is for you. It is an act of declaration. It is you, telling the universe and telling yourself that your eyes are now open. You are no longer asleep. You are no longer one of the herd. You have seen the silent city, and you will never be the same. Do it now. Lock it in. Let us speak of the symbols. The strange geometric patterns left behind after each ascension. The intricate maps drawn by the hand of the silent child, Lily. These were not random scribbles of a fractured mind. They were a language. A form of communication so alien, so complex, that it operated on a level far beyond human linguistics. Blackwood believed it was the language of the entity, and he was partially correct. But he, in his arrogance, saw it as something to be translated, to be understood in the same way one would decipher a forgotten alphabet. He was thinking in two dimensions. The symbols were not just a language. They were a form of physics. They were schematics. Each symbol was a key, a specific frequency, a geometric formula for manipulating the fabric of reality. When patient 73 was coerced into chanting the guttural phrases while focusing on a specific symbol, she wasn't just speaking a word. She was activating a command. She was tuning her own psychic energy to a specific resonance that, when combined with the ambient energy of the asylum, created a localized rupture in space-time. The ascension was not a rapture. It was a targeted teleportation, a forced translocation to the silent city that Lily was mapping. The symbols were the addresses. This is a truth that has been understood by secret schools of thought for millennia. Sacred geometry, the patterns that underpin our reality, can be used not just to build temples, but to bend the laws of nature. Blackwood had stumbled upon the inverted form of this knowledge, the discordant geometries that do not create, but unmake. The symbols left on the floor were not just a calling card from the entity. They were the residual energetic signature of a dimensional equation being solved. The building itself, by having these symbols etched into its very fabric, was being slowly, methodically retuned. It was being transformed into a massive, static engine, a device whose purpose was to permanently lock onto a single, terrifying coordinate in the multiverse, the home of the entity. The patients who vanished were not just sacrifices. They were the power source, the biological batteries that fueled the machine. their life force consumed in the act of carving one more character of this terrible architectural spell. The concept of the empty man deserves a deeper, more terrifying examination. The staff who experienced it, the patients who were left hollowed out by it, they were not just fainting or dissociating. They were victims of a psychic hijacking. Think of the human consciousness, your own sense of I, as a flame burning in the vessel of your body. It is your identity, your will, your presence in this world. Now, imagine a force so vast, so powerful, and so utterly alien that its mere gaze acts like a hurricane, extinguishing that flame in an instant. This is what was happening at Willow Creek, when the entity, drawn by Blackwood's ritualistic calls, turned its attention towards the asylum. Its perception was a tangible force. The sensitives were the intended focal points, the windows through which it would look, but its gaze was not precise. It was like a floodlight in a dark room, its edges spilling out and touching those nearby. When a nurse or a guard was too close to a patient who was acting as a conduit, they were caught in the periphery of this alien perception. For a brief, terrifying moment, their own consciousness, their own flame was snuffed out, replaced by the overwhelming presence of the entity. They were not merely rendered unconscious. Their mind, their soul, was temporarily displaced, pushed out of their own body by a consciousness as vast as a galaxy. And in that moment of displacement, they were connected to the entity's own realm, the silent city. They saw what it saw. They felt what it felt. The human mind is not built to withstand such a connection. The sheer scale of it, the nonlinear time, the impossible geometry, the utter lack of individuality, it was a glimpse into a form of existence so antithetical to our own that it could not be processed. It could only be experienced as a profound, soul-shattering void. When their consciousness was finally able to reboot and return to their body, the specific memories were gone, mercifully erased by the brain's own self-preservation mechanisms. All that remained was the echo, the deep cellular memory of having been utterly and completely replaced. It was the psychic scar left by the ultimate violation, the temporary theft of one's own soul. Let's dissect the nature of the entity itself. Blackwood, in his hubris, viewed it as a god, a being of immense power to be worshipped and controlled. The patients saw it as a demon, a shadow that haunted the halls and stole their friends. Both were wrong. Both were projecting human concepts onto something that was, by its very nature, beyond them. The entity was not a god, nor was it a demon. It was something far more unsettling, a different form of life, a consciousness that existed on a fundamentally different substrate of reality. Imagine a being that is not singular, but collective. A consciousness that is not located in a brain, but is distributed across an entire dimension, like a mycelial network woven into the fabric of its own space-time. It does not experience time linearly. It does not have a physical body in any sense that we would understand. It is a sentient geometry, a living, thinking, topological form. Its home, the silent city that Lily drew, was not a city of bricks and mortar. It was a map of the entity's own mind, a physical representation of its thoughts. The silent angles were the pathways of its consciousness. When it looked into our world, it wasn't seeing with eyes. It was extending a part of its own geometric consciousness, a tendril of its being, into our dimension. This is why its presence warped the physical space of the asylum. Our reality, with its rigid Euclidean laws, was being forced to accommodate a non-Euclidean sentient structure. The entity's motives were not evil in the human sense. A human walking through a forest is not evil to the ants it steps on. It is simply operating on a different scale, with a different awareness. The entity was drawn to Willow Creek by the psychic resonance Blackwood was creating. It was a frequency it recognized, a call it was compelled to answer. It consumed the sensitives, not out of malice, but out of a form of alien biology. It was absorbing their consciousness, their life force, as a source of novel information, a taste of a different kind of existence. Blackwood's ultimate failure was one of imagination. He tried to impose human desires, power, immortality onto a being for whom those concepts were utterly meaningless. He was a child trying to bargain with a hurricane. The concept of institutional manipulation is at the very core of the Willow Creek saga. The asylum itself was a weaponized system, a machine designed not for healing, but for control and exploitation. This is a pattern that repeats itself throughout history, a dark fractal that you can see everywhere once you know how to look for it. The public face of Willow Creek was one of benevolence, of scientific progress, of compassionate care. This is the first layer of control, the creation of a benevolent narrative. Institutions, whether they are medical, political, or financial, always present themselves as serving the greater good. They use the language of safety, of progress, of morality, to gain your trust and your compliance. They build impressive, solid-looking buildings to project an aura of stability and authority. But behind this facade, there is always a second hidden purpose. At Willow Creek, the hidden purpose was Blackwood's esoteric experiment. In the institutions that govern our world today, the hidden purpose is always the same: the acquisition and consolidation of power and control. The methods used by Blackwood are a microcosm of the methods used on a societal scale. The isolation of individuals, the stripping away of identity, the control of information, the use of fear and confusion to induce compliance, the deliberate blurring of reality through propaganda and gaslighting. Does any of this sound familiar? You are living inside a larger version of Willow Creek right now. You are told what to think, what to fear, what to desire. Your reality is curated for you by forces that do not have your best interests at heart. They seek to keep you in a state of low-level anxiety and confusion, to make you dependent on them for answers, for safety, for meaning. They want you to be a patient, not a free man. The story of Willow Creek is a lesson in seeing through the facade. It teaches you to question the benevolent narrative, to look for the hidden agenda, to recognize the architecture of control that surrounds you. It is a call to reclaim your own mind from the institutions that seek to own it. The power of suppressed truth is a force of nature. Like a river that has been dammed, it does not simply disappear. It builds pressure. It seeks out cracks. It erodes the foundations of the structures that were built to contain it. And eventually, inevitably, it breaks through with devastating force. The entire history of Willow Creek is a story of suppression. Blackwood suppressed his true motives behind a mask of philanthropy. The asylum's administration suppressed the reality of the vanishings with fabricated reports. The state suppressed the true reason for the asylum's closure with a story of budget cuts. And finally, the entity itself suppressed the existence of Blackwood and his cabal by erasing them from time. Each layer of suppression created a new layer of instability. The pressure built and built until it erupted in the cataclysm of the Blackwood Requiem. This is a universal law. The energy required to suppress a truth is always greater than the energy of the truth itself. The lie is fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant reinforcement, constant vigilance. The truth, on the other hand, is self-evident. It simply is. Once it is revealed, it cannot be unseen. It rearranges the world around it. The forces that govern our society understand this perfectly. That is why they expend such colossal amounts of energy to control the narrative, to bury inconvenient histories, to discredit those who speak uncomfortable truths. They are fighting a constant, desperate battle against the natural tendency of truth to emerge. They are trying to dam 1,000 rivers at once, but they cannot succeed forever. The cracks are already showing. The dam is beginning to groan. The story of Willow Creek, a truth that has been buried for decades, is just one of the trickles that is now beginning to seep through. As you absorb this story, as you share it, you are contributing to the pressure. You are helping to erode the dam. You are participating in the great unveiling, the slow but inexorable process by which all that has been hidden will be brought into the light. Never underestimate the power of a forbidden story. It is a weapon. It is a key. And in the right hands, it can change the world. Let's examine the psychological profile of the men who are drawn to this kind of knowledge. The men who are watching this right now. You are not like the others. You have always felt a sense of dissatisfaction with the world as it has been presented to you. You possess an innate skepticism, a refusal to blindly accept the comfortable lies that sedate the masses. You are driven by a deep burning desire for mastery. Not just mastery over a skill or a trade, but mastery over yourself, over your own mind, and over the hidden systems that govern your reality. You are not content to be a pawn in someone else's game. You want to understand the rules of the game, and you want to become a player. This desire is not born of arrogance. It is born of a profound, instinctual understanding that to be ignorant is to be vulnerable. To be asleep is to be prey. The world of men is a world of power dynamics, of hidden hierarchies, of psychological warfare. You know this not because someone taught it to you, but because you feel it in your bones. You are drawn to stories like Willow Creek, not for the cheap thrill of a ghost hunt, but because they resonate with a truth you already know, that there are layers to reality, and that true power lies in the ability to perceive and navigate those hidden layers. You are an explorer, an archaeologist of forbidden knowledge. You are willing to descend into the darkness, to confront the unsettling truths, because you know that is where the real treasure is buried. The masses crave comfort and security. They want to be told that the world is safe, that the people in charge are benevolent, that everything is under control. You, on the other hand, crave the truth, no matter how sharp, no matter how terrifying. You understand that safety is an illusion, and that the only real security comes from knowledge, from awareness, from the cultivation of your own inner strength. This is what separates you. This is what makes you part of the elite, not an elite of wealth or status, but an elite of consciousness. You are one of the few who are choosing to wake up. The theme of ancient corruption is woven into the very soil of Willow Creek. The land was considered wrong long before Blackwood arrived, a place of silent screams. This is not just a poetic detail. It points to a deeper, more insidious truth. Evil is not always an act of human creation. Sometimes it is a pre-existing condition. There are places on this earth that are resonant with a certain frequency of darkness, nexuses of negative energy that have been accumulating for eons. These are the places where tragedies happen, where violence seems to erupt without cause, where madness takes root. Blackwood did not create the evil at Willow Creek. He was drawn to it. His own internal corruption, his ambition, his obsession, resonated with the ancient corruption of the land itself. He was a tuning fork, vibrating at the same dark frequency, and he was pulled there by a force he mistook for his own ambition. This is a critical concept to understand. The great evils of history are often not just the product of a single man's or a single group's ideology. They are a synergy, a perfect storm where human darkness aligns with a pre-existing environmental or energetic darkness. The place provides the power, and the man provides the will. Together, they create a gateway for horrors that neither could unleash on their own. Think of the great battlefields of history, the sites of ancient massacres, the locations of notorious prisons or concentration camps. These places remain scarred. The energy of the suffering, the fear, the violence soaks into the very ground, creating a permanent stain, a psychic wound on the face of the planet. And these wounds can be reopened. They can attract new darkness, new Blackwoods, new ideologies that will feed on the latent power of the place. Corruption is not just a moral failing. It is an energetic frequency. It is a form of consciousness that can lie dormant in the land, waiting for a vessel, waiting for a new institution to be built upon it, waiting for a new generation to forget the warnings and to once again break the sacred ground. Willow Creek was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a disease that is as old as the earth itself. The role of the family is a recurring, tragic theme in this story, and it serves as a powerful lesson in control. The families of the sensitives, the families of the children in Ward C, they were not villains. They were the first victims, the unwitting accomplices in Blackwood's scheme. They were manipulated by their own fear, their own shame, and their own desire for a simple solution. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, mental illness or any form of psychic strangeness was a profound source of social shame. A family with a difficult member was seen as tainted, genetically, or morally flawed. This created an immense pressure to hide the problem, to make it go away. Blackwood and his institution offered them a perfect solution. He was a respected authority figure, a man of science and medicine. He offered a discreet, professional, and, most importantly, final way to deal with their problem. He weaponized their shame against them. He made them believe that signing over their loved one was an act of compassion, the best and only option available. They were presented with a choice that was not a choice at all. This is a tactic of control as old as time. Create a problem, amplify the fear and shame associated with it, and then present yourself as the only solution. We see this on a macro scale every single day. The media creates a moral panic, a new thing to be afraid of. The government then steps in, offering new laws, new regulations, new systems of surveillance as the only way to keep you safe. They use your fear as leverage to increase their control. The families of the Willow Creek patients teach us a harsh but necessary lesson. Blind trust in authority is a fatal mistake. The desire to avoid shame, to find an easy solution, can lead you to sacrifice the very people you are meant to protect. It is a call for radical personal responsibility. You must be the guardian of your own family, your own mind, your own soul. You cannot outsource that responsibility to any institution, no matter how benevolent it claims to be. Because the moment you do, you are handing the keys of your life to a man like Alistair Blackwood. Let's explore the concept of religious horror, not in the sense of demons and devils from a specific theology, but in a more fundamental, existential sense. The horror of Willow Creek is the horror of a faith that is answered. Blackwood had a faith. It was not in God, but in the power of the abyss, in the existence of the entity. He performed rituals, he made sacrifices, he had a doctrine, a dogma, and a holy place. He was the high priest of a dark religion of his own creation. And his God answered. The ultimate horror is not that we are alone in the universe. The ultimate horror is that we are not, and that the forces that exist beyond our perception are not benevolent, are not paternal, and are not interested in our salvation. They are alien, they are powerful, and their interaction with our world, when it occurs, is inherently destructive to our sense of reality and self. The story of Willow Creek is a perversion of the classic religious narrative. The prophet does not lead his people to enlightenment, but to annihilation. The sacrifices do not bring redemption, but erasure. The final communion with the divine does not bring eternal life, but a judgment of absolute negation. This is the true nature of religious horror. It is the realization that the search for meaning, the desire to connect with something greater than ourselves, can lead us not to a heaven, but to a hell of our own making. It is the understanding that faith, when placed in the wrong things, is the most powerful self-destructive force in the universe. Blackwood's sin was not that he was an atheist. His sin was that he was a believer. He had absolute faith in his ability to control the sacred, to command the divine. And the divine, in its own terrible way, answered his prayers and showed him the true meaning of power. It taught him the final brutal lesson. When you build a temple to a monster, do not be surprised when it shows up for worship. And do not be surprised when it finds you to be the most fitting sacrifice. Now, we must confront the legacy of the survivors. Not the handful of staff whose minds were wiped clean, nor the children of Ward C who were given a merciful forgetting. I speak of the other patients, the ones who were not chosen for ascension, the ones who were left behind when the asylum's doors were finally chained shut. These individuals were transferred to other state facilities, their files stamped with new diagnoses: schizophrenia, delusional paranoia, chronic hysteria. The medical establishment, in its infinite, arrogant ignorance, saw only the symptoms. They did not see the cause. They could not comprehend that these men and women were not suffering from a malfunction of the brain, but from a perfectly rational response to an irrational reality. They were the veterans of a secret, psychic war. They had lived for years in a building that was actively trying to unmake their minds. They had felt the constant low-grade hum of a trans-dimensional engine. They had seen their fellow inmates vanish from locked rooms. They had felt the chilling presence of the empty man. They had witnessed things that the human psyche is not designed to witness. And for this, they were labeled insane. They were subjected to electroshock therapy, to lobotomies, to a new kind of violation that sought to silence the truths they carried. Their stories were dismissed as delusions, their memories chemically burned away. This is one of the most powerful tools of control used by the system, the pathologizing of truth. When someone sees through the veil, when they witness something that contradicts the official narrative, they are not engaged with. They are not investigated. They are labeled. They are called a conspiracy theorist, a madman, a heretic. The system does not debunk the truth. It discredits the messenger. It turns the seer into a pariah, ensuring that their knowledge can never contaminate the carefully constructed reality of the masses. The survivors of Willow Creek were the ultimate inconvenient truth. They were living proof of Blackwood's experiments, of the entity, of the horrors that had transpired. And so, they had to be silenced, not by erasure from time, but by the slow, grinding erasure of institutionalization. They were driven mad not by what they had seen, but by the world's absolute refusal to see it with them. The disappearance of Dr. Alistair Blackwood himself is a masterclass in historical manipulation. To the outside world, the story was simple. The brilliant but troubled doctor, overcome by the stress of his work and the impending closure of his beloved asylum, simply walked away from his life. He vanished. It was painted as a romantic, tragic mystery. A man who had dedicated his life to the minds of others had finally lost his own. This narrative served a crucial purpose. It preserved his professional reputation, ensuring that his pioneering work would still be studied, his name still held in a certain regard. It neatly cauterized the wound, preventing any deeper investigation into the asylum's practices. A mad doctor is a closed loop. A missing doctor is a mystery, but not a threat. The truth, though he was not just missing but erased, is a concept so far outside the bounds of accepted reality that it could never be allowed to surface. The erasure of Blackwood and his inner circle was the entity's final, and perhaps most profound, act of control. It was a strategic move. By removing the perpetrators from the timeline, it effectively sealed the event, turning it into a self-contained anomaly. Without the men who orchestrated it, the story of Willow Creek loses its anchor. It becomes a ghost story, a collection of strange phenomena with no discernible cause or intelligence behind it. It becomes a myth, and myths can be dismissed. The entity, in its alien intelligence, understood something that we often forget. History is written by the survivors. By leaving no high-level survivors, no one who could articulate the what and the why of the experiment, it guaranteed the truth would remain buried. It pruned the timeline, cutting away the branches that would lead back to it. This is the ultimate power, not just to win the battle, but to erase any record that the war ever took place. It leaves the rest of us stumbling through the ruins, sensing that something profound and terrible happened here, but unable to ever fully grasp the scale of it. We are left with only the echoes, the shadows, and the deep, unsettling feeling that the official story is the biggest lie of all. Let's talk about the nature of awakening. It is not a gentle or pleasant process. It is not a flower slowly unfolding in the light. It is a violent, disorienting, and often painful birth. It is the tearing away of a comfortable reality, the shattering of cherished beliefs, the forced confrontation with truths that you are not prepared for. The journey you have been on through this story is a microcosm of that process. You began with a sense of unease, a hook that pulled you into the mystery. You descended, section by section, deeper into the darkness, each new revelation stripping away another layer of the world you thought you knew. This is the path of the initiate. It is a path of descent. You must go down into the abyss before you can hope to climb to any real height. The masses seek to avoid this process at all costs. They cling to their illusions, their distractions, their comforting narratives. They are terrified of the darkness, and so they refuse to even acknowledge its existence. They choose to remain in the womb, in the warm, comfortable prison of ignorance. But you have chosen a different path. You have chosen to be born. The discomfort you may feel, the sense of dread, the feeling that the world is a more dangerous and complex place than you imagined. This is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the process is working. You are shedding an old skin. Your eyes are adjusting to a new, harsher light. The pain of awakening is a necessary part of the process. It is the pain of growth, the pain of muscles being used for the first time. You must embrace it. You must lean into it. Because on the other side of that pain is a clarity, a strength, and a freedom that the sleeping masses can never know. You are not just learning about the darkness. You are learning to see in it. You are forging yourself into a man who is not afraid of the truth, no matter how monstrous it may be. This is the alchemy of the soul. This is the great work, and you have already begun. The concept of a power-based voice is not just about a tone of delivery. It is about the fundamental frequency of the information being transmitted. The voice of the mainstream, the voice of the institutions, is a voice of placation. It is soft, it is reassuring, it is designed to soothe you, to lull you into a state of passive acceptance. It speaks to you as if you are a child, a fragile creature who must be protected from the harsh realities of the world. It is a voice of castration. It seeks to strip you of your power, your agency, your righteous anger. The voice I am using with you now, the voice that this story is told in, is its polar opposite. It is a voice of activation. It is hard. It is direct. It is unapologetic. It is designed not to comfort, but to ignite. It speaks to you as if you are a man, a sovereign being who is capable of confronting the truth and wielding it as a weapon. It is a voice of command. Not a command to obey me, but a command to obey the highest part of yourself, the part of you that yearns for freedom, for mastery, for truth. This voice does not seek to give you answers. It seeks to awaken the part of you that can find its own answers. It does not seek to lead you. It seeks to remind you that you are your own leader. This is the fundamental difference between the shepherd and the awakener. The shepherd wants to keep his flock safe, dependent, and contained. The awakener wants to turn the sheep into wolves. He wants to shatter the fence and point the way to the wild, dangerous, but ultimately liberating forest. As you listen to this, you can feel the difference in your own body. The voice of the system makes you feel sleepy, passive, secure. This voice makes you feel alert, energized, perhaps even angry. That anger is a sacred fire. It is the fuel of transformation. Do not suppress it. Do not fear it. It is the sign that you are remembering who you really are. Consider the macabre history of the Blackwood family itself, a detail often overlooked in the sanitized versions of this story. Alistair Blackwood was not an anomaly. a sudden bloom of darkness from a normal family tree. He was the culmination of a lineage steeped in the esoteric and the forbiddens. His great-grandfather was a notorious figure in the British East India Company, a man who used his position not just for wealth, but to gain access to the hidden libraries and secret societies of the subcontinent, collecting forbidden texts on Tantra and the darker forms of yogic power. His grandfather, a wealthy industrialist, was a high-ranking Freemason who allegedly broke away to form his own, more radical lodge, one that practiced a form of ritual magic aimed at contacting non-human intelligences. His own father, a respected surgeon, was known in certain circles for his private experiments into vivisection and the outer limits of physical endurance. The Blackwood family was a dynasty of control, each generation refining the methods of the last. They passed down not just wealth, but a specific and dangerous form of knowledge, the science of breaking down the barriers of the human mind and spirit. Alistair was not a rogue element. He was the heir to a dark throne. He was simply applying the family's accumulated knowledge on an institutional scale. Willow Creek was the grand synthesis of his ancestors' work. The great-grandfather's esoteric texts provided the theoretical framework. The grandfather's ritualistic practices provided the methodology. And the father's cold, clinical detachment provided the necessary lack of empathy to carry it all out. This is a crucial lesson in how power truly operates in the world. It is often dynastic. It is passed down, not just through blood, but through a shared philosophy, a secret education that occurs behind the closed doors of elite families. The corruption is not random. It is cultivated. It is nurtured over generations, growing stronger and more sophisticated with each passing heir. Blackwood was not just a man. He was the sharpened tip of a very old and very poisonous spear. The ultimate psychological control system is the inversion of truth. It is the process by which the profane is made sacred, and the sacred is made profane. This was Blackwood's most potent weapon, and it is the primary weapon of the systems that govern our world today. Blackwood took the sacred human soul, the seat of consciousness and individuality, and he treated it as a profane object, a resource to be mined, a variable to be manipulated, a battery to be consumed. He took the profane, the alien, the chaotic force of the entity, and he elevated it to the level of the sacred. He built a temple to it. He worshipped it. He sacrificed the truly sacred to the truly profane. This act of inversion creates a profound spiritual sickness, a disorientation of the soul that leaves a man unable to distinguish up from down, light from dark. This is the state that the architects of our society wish to keep you in. They take the profane materialism, degeneracy, nihilism, and they elevate it. They call it progress. They call it freedom. They call it enlightenment. They celebrate the decay of tradition, the erosion of virtue, the dissolution of the family. They tell you that your identity is a fluid social construct, that your history is a source of shame, that your highest calling is the pursuit of fleeting pleasure. At the same time, they take the truly sacred truth, honor, courage, discipline, the sovereignty of the individual, and they treat it as profane. They call it toxic, they call it outdated, they call it dangerous. They mock the man who seeks to cultivate inner strength. They ridicule the man who speaks of truth. They seek to shame the man who holds himself to a higher standard. The story of Willow Creek is a perfect allegory for this inversion. It is a warning against a world that has lost its moral compass, a world that worships the abyss and sacrifices its own children to it. To achieve self-mastery, you must reject this inversion. You must have the courage to see the world as it is, to call things by their true names. You must have the strength to hold the sacred as sacred, even when the entire world is telling you it is profane. This is the foundation of all true power. Let us analyze the final, chilling irony of Willow Creek's legacy. After the asylum was abandoned, it became a pilgrimage site for a new kind of seeker, the ghost hunter, the paranormal investigator, the urban explorer. These individuals, armed with their EMF meters, their spirit boxes, and their night vision cameras, descended upon the decaying ruins, hoping to catch a glimpse of the other side. They were looking for ghosts. They were looking for the spirits of the tormented patients, for the lingering shade of Dr. Blackwood. They were, in their own way, continuing his work. They were drawn to the same place for the same fundamental reason, a desire to touch the unknown. But their methods were a pale, pathetic imitation of Blackwood's focused, intentional will. They were children playing with a loaded gun that had already been fired. The irony is this: the true horror of Willow Creek was not the presence of ghosts, but the absence of them. The ascended patients were not lingering. They were gone, consumed, their energy ripped from this plane of existence. Blackwood and his cabal were not haunting the halls. They were erased from time itself. The paranormal investigators were searching for echoes in a place that had been defined by a profound and terrifying silence. The whispers they heard were not the voices of the dead, but the residual resonance of the building's warped architecture, the psychic scars left on the environment. The cold spots were not the touch of a spirit, but the lingering thermodynamic effect of a localized rupture in spacetime. They were measuring the aftermath of a nuclear explosion with a thermometer. They were mistaking the radiation for the bomb itself. This is a perfect metaphor for how most people approach the great mysteries of life. They focus on the superficial phenomena, the spooky effects, the surface-level strangeness. They lack the discipline, the knowledge, and the courage to look deeper, to confront the intelligent, intentional, and often malevolent forces that are the cause of those effects. They are content to be ghost hunters when they should be striving to be exorcists. The theme of identity transformation is not just a suggestion for the audience. It was the explicit goal of Blackwood's entire operation. He was not trying to cure his patients. He was trying to transform them into something else, something non-human. He was a dark alchemist, attempting to transmute the lead of ordinary human consciousness into the gold of a perfect psychic conduit. His methods were a twisted form of initiation ritual. The isolation, the sensory deprivation, the psychological torment, these were all designed to break down the subject's ego, to shatter their sense of self, to erase the person they thought they were. This is a process that is mirrored in many secret societies and esoteric orders, both light and dark. The initiate must die to their old self in order to be reborn into a new state of being, with a new name, a new identity, and a new understanding of reality. Blackwood was forcing this transformation upon his victims. He was trying to create a new form of man, a being whose primary identity was not as an individual, but as a node in a network, a receiver for the transmissions of the entity. He was trying to breed a slave race, psychically attuned and perfectly obedient to the will of a higher, alien power. This is the ultimate form of control, not just to command a man's actions, but to fundamentally remake his identity, to rewrite his soul so that his desires are perfectly aligned with your own. This is the secret ambition of the ruling powers of our world. They do not just want your compliance. They want your transformation. They want to dissolve your identity as a sovereign individual, as a member of a family, as a part of a culture and a history, and remake you as a global citizen, a rootless, genderless, historyless consumer whose only identity is in your relationship to the state and the corporate machine. They are trying to turn you into a patient in a global version of Willow Creek. The act of reclaiming your power, of forging your own identity, is therefore an act of rebellion. It is a refusal to be transformed against your will. It is a declaration that you are the sole author of your own soul. The final unspoken truth of Willow Creek is that the experiment did not end with the asylum's closure. It merely entered a new phase. The entity, in its brief, violent interaction with our world, did more than just erase a few men and consume a few souls. It planted a seed. It left behind a resonance, a frequency, a set of ideas encoded into the very fabric of the place. And ideas are like viruses. They can spread. The few survivors, whose minds were wiped clean, the children of Ward C, who were released back into the world, they were carriers. They were not consciously aware of what they held within them, but the memory was there, deep in their subconscious, a dormant code waiting for the right conditions to be activated. Think of the symbols Lily drew, the language of the entity. Think of the principles of psychological control that Blackwood perfected. These concepts did not simply vanish. They leaked out into the world through the scattered records, through the traumatized memories of the low-level staff, through the very psychic stain on the land itself. These ideas have been slowly, subtly integrating themselves into the collective unconscious of our society. The techniques of mass gaslighting, the architecture of psychological control, the desire to contact non-human intelligences, the belief that the human mind is a machine to be hacked and reprogrammed. Where do you think these ideas came from? Willow Creek was a laboratory. It was a pilot program. And the results of that program, the successful techniques, have been scaled up and implemented on a global scale. The asylum is no longer a single physical building. It is a state of mind. It is the invisible prison that has been built around us, its walls constructed out of media manipulation, social engineering, and a constant, low-frequency hum of fear and anxiety. The goal is the same as Blackwood's, to break down the individual, to thin the veil, and to create a population that is docile, suggestible, and open to control by forces it cannot comprehend. The experiment is not over. You are living in it. So now you have the story, or at least as much of it as can be pieced together from the ashes and the echoes. You have walked the decaying halls of Willow Creek. You have stood in the shadow of Blackwood's ambition, and you have felt the cold gaze of the entity from beyond the veil. Do not make the mistake of thinking this was simply a history lesson. It was not. It was a diagnosis. It was the tracing of a disease back to one of its points of origin. The virus that was cultivated in that asylum is now pandemic. The whispering walls are all around you. They are in the device you are watching this on. They are in the news that is fed to you, the culture that is manufactured for you, the systems that are designed to control you. The goal is, and always has been, to make you a patient. To keep you docile, confused, and afraid. To make you believe that you are sick and that they are the only ones with the cure. But you now possess the antidote. The antidote is knowledge. It is the awareness that these forces exist, that these games are being played. The antidote is the refusal to be a victim, the refusal to be a patient. It is the conscious decision to become a man of power, a man who sees the world as it is, not as he is told it is. The story of Willow Creek is now a part of you. It is a lens through which you can view the world, a filter that will allow you to see the hidden patterns of control that are invisible to the sleeping masses. Do not let this knowledge become a burden. Let it become your armor. Let it become your weapon. The world is a far more dangerous and far more magical place than you have been led to believe. There are forces at play that defy easy explanation. There are men who seek to enslave you, and there are powers that would see you erased. But there is also a power within you, a sovereignty of the soul, a fire that once truly lit can never be extinguished. Your awakening is their greatest fear. Go now and live as if you know the truth, because you do.